My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and this is how I took revenge on the man who made me believe I wasn't strong enough to survive without him. I remember the night my life ended. Not literally, but everything I thought I knew, everything I trusted, every corner of safety in my own home burned to the ground. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, argued over bills, laughed about nothing. A manila envelope was lying there, almost too ordinary to be dangerous. But when I opened it, I swear the air left my lungs. Inside were contracts, bank statements, signatures, my name written in places I had never signed. At first, I thought it had to be some mistake. Maybe the bank mixed up files, maybe a notary screwed up. But then I saw his handwriting in the margins, notes, arrows, little reminders. It was him, my husband, Daniel. This wasn't an affair, though God knows he was having one of those too. This was a plan, a calculated, months-long plan to drain my accounts, transfer assets, leave me with debts I didn't even know existed. He had forged my name, sold investments I had worked for, and taken out loans that would all come crashing down on me. And just like that, I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his scapegoat. When I confronted him, he didn't even flinch. He looked at me like I was pathetic for only just figuring it out. He actually smirked. And then he said the words that carved themselves into my bones. Emily, you were never built for survival. You always needed me. That night, I packed a small bag and drove away, not even knowing where I was going. I thought maybe my in-laws would help, at least give me a place to breathe. But when I showed up, mascara streaked down my face, begging for someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. They laughed. They told me Daniel warned them I'd come crying, spinning stories his mother called me dramatic. His father said, well, sweetheart, you signed the papers. That's on you. I drove away shaken, barely able to keep the wheel straight. I had nothing, no money, no family to lean on. My so-called friends, half of them were closer to him. The rest didn't want to get involved. In that moment, in the silence of my car, I realized something brutal. I was disposable to him, a stepping stone he used, then discarded. And staring at those forged papers, one thought grew louder and louder inside my head. He didn't just cheat on me. He didn't just betray me. He tried to erase me. And that's when something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to beg him to undo the damage. I wasn't going to cry in a courtroom while he grinned at the wreckage. Number. I was going to build myself back up from the ashes, and then I was going to make him choke on every single thing he stole from me. That night was the end of Emily Carter, the woman who trusted too much. But it was also the birth of someone he never saw coming. And this is how I took revenge. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows who your parents are, where your weekends are spent at church picnics or high school football games. My mom was a waitress. My dad worked at the auto plant until the layoffs shut it down. We didn't have much, but we had enough. My parents believed in two things above everything else: loyalty and sacrifice. If you loved someone, you showed up for them. You worked the extra hours. You gave the bigger half of the sandwich. You didn't complain about it either. That's what I grew up watching. My mom scraping her tips into a jar so my dad could get a new set of work boots. My dad picking up side jobs so I could afford cheer uniforms. Love in my house meant giving until it hurt. So when I met Daniel in college, I thought I'd struck gold. He was everything I wasn't: polished, charming, ambitious. He had this way of making a whole room turn toward him without even trying. And somehow, he wanted me. Me, the girl who wore hand-me-down sweaters and had never been farther than Cleveland. He said he loved my simplicity, that I grounded him. I didn't realize at the time how much power there is in being chosen by someone like him. He made me feel like I wasn't just small-town Emily anymore. I was someone who could belong in his world. Our first year together was intoxicating. He used to say things like, "Don't settle for average, Em. You're meant for bigger." And I believed him. I believed in us. He had this vision of starting his own business, building an empire, and I wanted to help him. I wanted to be the woman behind the man, the one who made it all possible. So while he was chasing dreams, I was pulling double shifts as a nurse. I'd come home with aching feet and swollen hands, but he'd look at me with those blue eyes and say, "Just wait, baby. Our future is coming. One day, you won't have to work so hard." And I held on to that promise like it was scripture. That was my role. Be the good wife. Be the support system. Sacrifice. Even when it meant losing little pieces of myself, I let him handle everything. The bills, the savings, the investments. I signed papers I didn't fully read. Because why wouldn't I trust him? He was my husband, my partner. That's what marriage was supposed to be. Two people carrying the weight together. At least that's what I thought. But not everyone believed in us, especially his mother. From the first time I met her, she made me feel like I was on trial. Her eyes would sweep over my clothes, my nails, the way I spoke. I'll never forget her telling me, "Daniel deserves someone who can keep up with him." As if my whole life was just some stepping stone until he found someone better. She was cold, judgmental, always finding subtle ways to remind me I didn't measure up. And Daniel, he never defended me. He'd just shrug, laugh it off, say, "That's just how she is." But you know what it feels like to sit at a family dinner and know every bite of food is seasoned with quiet disapproval? That was my normal. The only person I could ever fully confide in was my best friend, Claire. She'd been in my life since middle school. The kind of friend who will sit on the bathroom floor with you at 2 a.m. and not leave until you've stopped crying. She was the first one to tell me Daniel was different, that he had a side I wasn't seeing. But I brushed her off. I said he just had high standards, that he was stressed, that she didn't understand him the way I did. Looking back now, I see it. I see how I silenced every warning, how I confused devotion with blind loyalty. Before it all fell apart, I had my own quiet dreams. They weren't grand like his, but they were mine. I wanted to start a family, maybe go back to school, become a nurse practitioner. I pictured a little house with a swing set in the backyard, Sunday mornings with pancakes and cartoons. I thought we were building toward that life together. I felt secure, or at least I thought I did. The truth is, I built my sense of safety on him, not on myself. I believed his promises so completely that I never stopped to wonder what would happen if they weren't real. And that blind faith, that willingness to give and give without asking for anything back, was the crack in the foundation he drove a wedge through. Because the girl from Ohio who was taught to sacrifice, who believed love meant carrying the heavier load, that was the girl he knew he could use. And he did. The night everything changed didn't start with fireworks. It didn't start with screaming. It started with silence. I had picked up an extra shift at the hospital, 12 hours on my feet, charting until my head ached. I was supposed to get off at midnight, but we finished early. I remember being almost excited. I thought I'd surprise Daniel. Maybe we'd sit on the couch, eat leftovers, Just be together. But when I opened the front door, the house felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. His car was in the driveway, but he wasn't home. That's when I saw it. The papers on the table. It looked harmless at first, just a stack of envelopes and manila folders. But something pulled me closer. My name was written across the top page, bold letters, Emily Carter. And under it, a loan agreement, hundreds of thousands of dollars. My stomach dropped. I sat down, my hands shaking so hard the papers rattled. Loan after loan, debt piled on debt, all of it tied to me. My signature scribbled at the bottom of every page. Except I had never signed them, not once. At first, I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I had signed something without realizing. But then I saw the handwriting. His. Notes in the margins. Arrows. Reminders. He had forged everything. He had been building this trap for months, and he'd been using my name to do it. I remember whispering out loud, "No, no, no, no," over and over, like maybe the sound of my own voice could make it untrue. The next morning, my phone started ringing. Lawyers, banks, debt collectors, strangers telling me I owed more money than I'd make in 10 lifetimes. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I got a call from the county clerk. Daniel had filed paperwork. He'd transferred the house into his name alone. Our house, the place I thought was ours. And me? I wasn't just left with nothing. I was left with less than nothing. I couldn't breathe. I kept thinking, there has to be some mistake. He wouldn't do this to me. But deep down, I knew. I knew. A few nights later, Claire begged me to leave the house. She said I needed to eat, needed to get out of my head. So we went to this little Italian restaurant downtown, the one Daniel used to take me to when we first dated. I walked in and froze. There he was, at our table, laughing, smiling, holding hands with another woman. She was beautiful, polished, exactly the kind of woman his mother always thought he deserved. And they weren't just flirting. They were comfortable, familiar, like this wasn't new, like they had been doing this for a long time. I stood there in the doorway, my whole body trembling while the world spun. He looked up, saw me, and didn't even flinch. No guilt, no panic, just annoyance, like I was an interruption. I managed to choke out, "How long?" He leaned back in his chair, still holding her hand, and said it as casually as if he were ordering dessert. "Almost 2 years. 2 years. While I was working double shifts. While I was holding us together. While I was signing my life away on papers I didn't even know were lies. I think I whispered something. Maybe why? Maybe how could you? I don't remember. But I will never forget his answer. "You'll figure it out. You always do. You're just not enough for me anymore." Those words sliced through me deeper than any knife could. Not enough. Not enough. After everything I had given, after every piece of myself I had buried for him, I was still not enough. I stumbled out of the restaurant before Claire could stop me. I made it home somehow, locked the door, collapsed on the bathroom floor, and I cried until there was nothing left. I cried until my chest physically hurt, until my eyes burned, until my body went numb. I thought I would die that night, not because he left me, not even because of the other woman, but because I realized it had never been about love. It was a plan, a cold, deliberate plan to strip me of everything, to leave me drowning in debt while he walked away free. That's when something inside me shifted. The girl who believed in loyalty, who believed in sacrifice, who thought love meant carrying the heavier load, she was gone. And in her place was someone else, someone darker, someone who wasn't going to just survive this. someone who was going to make him pay. That night wasn't just heartbreak, it was ignition. For the first few weeks after everything blew up, I moved through my days like a ghost stitched together out of habit. I would wake up, put on scrubs, go to work, come home, and stare at the same four walls until sleep took me. It felt like my life was being processed in slow motion by someone else. My name on a dozen paper forms, but none of it actually belonging to me. Then the town started to whisper. People I'd smiled at for years looked at me differently, like they were trying to place where I'd failed. I would see the headlines in message threads. Local entrepreneur dumps wife, house transferred to his name. The words fool and naive followed me like a shadow. His mother started bringing those looks everywhere, and even strangers would tilt their heads and say, I'm so sorry, Em, like it was a tragedy I'd caused myself. The debts were the least of it at first. The humiliation was worse. I went to apply for a credit card under my name, and they laughed me out of the branch without ever saying it. My car, the one I'd bought secondhand and kept for years, got a repo notice. I still remember the morning a truck backed up to my driveway, and the driver took one look at me sitting on the porch and said, Ma'am, we need to take the vehicle. I watched him drive the thing away, like I was watching my dignity being carried off in somebody else's hands. At work, the pitying glances were worse than the whispers. Colleagues who used to ask about my weekend would now avoid mentioning Daniel, like they were stepping around a minefield. A couple of nurses dropped off casseroles and then began to stop by less frequently, apologizing for being so busy. Even patients asked if I needed time off, and I lied and said I was fine because admitting I wasn't felt like handing them the last private piece of me. Some nights, I would drive aimlessly for hours. The city looked different at 2 a.m. Deserted, indifferent. I'd pass the places we'd once been together and feel the weight of what he'd taken like a physical pressure behind my ribs. There were moments in the quiet of my car when the dark got loud and the only sane thought I could find was how easy it would be to stop. The idea would slide over me like a cold hand, dangerous, tempting, but most of the time it felt less like an urge and more like a test. Did I have anything left to fight for? That is the funny thing about shame. It can slow you down and also make you furious. Every time someone said, I should be grateful I escaped, or that at least you're free, a hot edge would slice across me. Free. Free is not getting calls from collection agencies. Free is not being told your name is a debt on someone else's ledger. Free is not watching the man who promised to love you parade the life he stole from you across social media. And parade he did. He posted photos, glassy dinners, vacations, the new woman leaning into him like she belonged there. It was calculated cruelty. I could feel the likes multiplying like pebbles dropped into my chest. People whispered that he'd upgraded, as if the object of a marriage could be traded like furniture. I remember clicking on a photo of them laughing and feeling something inside me shift from sorrow into something colder, hunger for justice, or maybe for retribution. Claire was the one who refused to let me disappear into myself. When I told her I thought about leaving, she looked at me like I'd said the single dumbest thing she'd ever heard. He doesn't get to win like this, she said bluntly, and I tasted truth in it. Claire helped me pick up the pieces in the only way she knew how. Practical, messy, unromantic. She came over, spread papers across my kitchen table and made me read. I started to document everything. At first, it was sloppy. bank statements, screenshots of posts, copies of lawyers' letters. But the more I pulled, the more spiderwebbed his lies became. Hidden accounts, transfers that didn't match a single receipt, properties I never knew existed, messages where he instructed someone to handle the paperwork and then signed with my name. Each document was a small grenade of betrayal. Each one felt like evidence that the man I'd loved had been methodical in every way. Quietly, I met with a lawyer. She was not sentimental. She didn't tell me I was brave for coming in. She gave me dates and the kind of cold possibilities that make your pulse race. If we can prove forged signatures, this isn't just civil. There may be criminal fraud here. For the first time since that envelope on the kitchen table, something in me steadied. The lawyer's voice was a hinge swinging open to a room filled with options I hadn't let myself see. Psychological warfare became my creed. When Daniel called, I let the world see a version of me he expected. Weak, beaten, small. I answered in a thin voice. I told him I was getting counseling and that I didn't want to make waves. I let him assume I was crumbling. I wanted him to think everything had been as easy as he'd planned. But behind my calm, I was building. I logged every call. I saved every message. I made lists of dates and places he'd been. I tracked bank transfers with the stubborn patience of someone knitting a rope to climb out of a well. I found a notary who agreed to testify, a bank employee who remembered a suspicious signature. Claire sat with me on nights when the work was boring and bureaucratic. Hours of phone calls, filings, chasing leads. It was tedious and furious and intoxicating in its way. And then there was his line that stuck in me like a barb. Survival isn't in your nature, Em. You'll always need saving. He said it like it was a fact. He said it with that condescending smirk that had once made me feel small and loved and safe all at once. The phrase lodged in my head and starved me of sleep. If he believed I'd always need saving, I decided I would teach him the opposite. I taught myself to be patient. I taught myself how to be invisible and observant at the same time. I practiced appearing broken in public while my private life became surgical. The humiliation fed the planning. The loneliness fed the discipline. What started as fear hardened into strategy. Shame sharpened into focus. There were nights when the temptation to simply run, to pick up and vanish, circled back. It would have been easy. New name, new city, an exit he hadn't even expected. But while running might have saved me from looks and whispers, it would have left him unaccountable. It would have been a surrender he'd relish. So I stayed, not because I wanted pity or because I loved him anymore. I stayed because the only way to prove him wrong was to face him, to dismantle what he'd built piece by piece and make the world see the truth. For the first time in months, I felt something that was neither defeat nor despair. It was a quiet, simmering certainty that I could take this man down and leave myself standing. That certainty became my companion in the long, lonely nights when the city was asleep and the paperwork spread like an accusation across my table. It whispered that survival was not a gift he gave me. It was something I could take by force if I had to. And I did. The morning of the hearing, I stood in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. My hair was pulled back, my makeup subtle but sharp. There was no trembling in my hands, no pit in my stomach. For months, I'd lived like a shadow. But that day, I was still. I parked outside the courthouse in the same spot where I once cried myself hoarse. convinced my life was over. I took a deep breath and whispered the words that had carried me here. He doesn't get to win. Not with me. When I walked into that courtroom, Daniel was already there. Expensive suit, smug grin, leaning back in his chair like he was untouchable. His mother sat in the row behind him, her chin lifted, eyes full of disdain. The new girlfriend, flawless, polished, wrapped in the confidence of someone who thought she'd already replaced me, twirled a strand of hair and whispered something in his ear. He smirked. They thought I was coming to beg. They thought this was just a formality before the hammer came down on me. But what they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I hadn't spent the last 6 months drowning. I'd been swimming quietly, pulling every thread until the whole fabric unraveled. When the judge called the case to order, Daniel's lawyer launched into a performance, smooth, rehearsed, painting me as careless, emotional, incompetent. The narrative was clear. Poor Daniel had been saddled with a wife who couldn't handle responsibility. Every word was a blade meant to cut me down. And I let them talk. I kept my face calm, even small, because I knew what was coming. When it was my lawyer's turn, the atmosphere shifted. She started slowly, methodically, presenting documents I had gathered. At first, the judge leaned back, expression neutral. Daniel smirked across the table at me, as if to say, "This won't work." But then my lawyer produced the first bombshell. Side-by-side signatures, mine and his forgery. Identical strokes in places no human hand could replicate naturally. The courtroom murmured. Daniel shifted in his chair. Next came the bank records. Accounts and offshore names, transactions traced back to him, money siphoned in and out like water through a sieve. Every transfer matched to dates when I was at work, logged in the hospital system, alibis for me, proof of guilt for him. Then came the witnesses. The notary who admitted he'd been pressured to look the other way. The bank employee who recalled Daniel showing up alone to sign for joint loans. Piece by piece, the scaffolding of his lies buckled under its own weight. And then, the twist he never saw coming, his girlfriend. Because what Daniel didn't realize was that she wasn't just arm candy. She was complicit. Texts between them showed her discussing how to move the papers faster. And once she's out of the picture, we're clear. My lawyer read those words out loud, each syllable echoing like a verdict before the verdict. The girlfriend's face drained of color. She pulled her hand away from his, whispering harshly. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Daniel's smirk cracked for the first time. By the time my lawyer was done, the courtroom felt like a different planet than the one I'd walked into. The judge's jaw was set, his gavel tapping impatiently as he ordered silence. And then came the ruling. The debts nullified. Every fraudulent loan tied back to Daniel, not me. The assets he tried to shield, frozen, pending criminal investigation. The business empire he'd built on my back, seized by the court, and his girlfriend, named in the proceedings, offered a deal if she testified against him. I watched the color drain from his face as the weight of it landed. His arrogance melted into panic, his shoulders curling inward, his lips pressed thin like he was trying not to scream. For the first time, Daniel looked small, and then the whispers spread. His mother gasped, covering her mouth with a shaking hand. People in the courtroom, people from town who had come to watch, exchanged looks. Gossip was already blooming like wildfire. The empire he had used to make me feel disposable was crumbling brick by brick under the weight of truth. But the most satisfying part wasn't just that I cleared my name, it was what came next. Because in the final order, the judge didn't just free me, he tied Daniel to the very debts he had tried to bury me under. Legally, irrevocably, those chains were his now. And when the gavel struck for the last time, I looked across the room at the man who once told me survival wasn't in my nature. And I thought, the man who said I would always need saving is now begging a judge for mercy. That was the day I got my life back. Not by running, not by hiding, not by begging, by standing up, piece by piece, and showing the world who Daniel really was. And watching him crumble wasn't just justice, it was survival. In the weeks after the courtroom, I expected to feel fireworks, some grand cinematic swell of triumph. Instead, what I felt was silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the suffocating emptiness of betrayal, not the hollow echo of being erased. This silence was clean. Daniel's source, Daniel's downfall happened fast. The man who strutted through town, shaking hands and flashing that politician's smile, was suddenly the subject of gossip whispered in coffee shops. His business, once his pride, collapsed under audits and frozen accounts. His mother stopped showing her face in public after the papers ran the story about her son's fraud. And Daniel himself, he went from laughing in restaurants with his mistress to sitting in hearings with lawyers who couldn't spin his crimes into anything but what they were. There's still talk of prison. Whether he serves time or not, I don't really care anymore. Because the truth is, his punishment started the moment the mask slipped and the world saw what he really was. But my story didn't end in that courtroom. That was only the turning point. The real victory came after, in the quiet work of rebuilding myself. I rented a small apartment, nothing glamorous. 2 rooms, a creaky window that sticks when it rains. But it's mine, paid for with money I earned in my name alone. The first night I slept there, I woke up at 3 a.m. in a panic, expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway. But there was nothing, just my breathing. And for the first time in years, I went back to sleep without fear. I painted the walls myself, a pale yellow in the kitchen, because it felt like sunlight. I hung photos of my parents, of Claire and me on road trips, of the girl I used to be before him. Every nail I hammered into the wall felt like staking a claim, not on the apartment, but on myself. At work, I started to walk in with my head high again. No more pity in people's eyes. Or maybe I just stopped caring if it was there. I wasn't the broken wife anymore. I was the woman who had survived the worst and come out sharper. Patients noticed, colleagues noticed, even I noticed, in the way my shoulders sat straighter, the way my voice carried differently. And slowly, I realized something. Revenge wasn't really about destroying him, not entirely. It was about saving me. Yes, I wanted him to pay, and he did. But the deeper truth was that I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't disposable, that I wasn't just the small-town girl destined to be erased. I needed to show myself that survival wasn't shameful, it was powerful. I used to think survival meant weakness, like it was proof I couldn't win. But now I see it differently. Survival is a weapon. It's armor. It's the choice to keep breathing, keep standing, even when someone tries to bury you alive. Daniel used to tell me I would always need saving. That survival wasn't in my nature. He was wrong. Survival is my nature. It always was. And now I wear it like armor. I don't know what my future looks like yet. Maybe I'll go back to school. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll fall in love again someday. Or maybe I won't. For once, it doesn't matter. Because my worth isn't tied to anyone else's vision of me anymore. What matters is that I reclaimed myself, piece by piece, breath by breath. And when I think back to that night on the bathroom floor, when I thought I couldn't survive him, I wish I could hold that version of me, whisper in her ear, "You don't just survive this, you rise from it, and one day you'll walk taller because of it." So here I am, Emily Carter, 29 years old, survivor, fighter, and for the first time in my life, free. If you've ever been told you're weak, if someone's voice has drilled into your skull until you believed you weren't enough, if someone tried to erase you from your own life, remember me. Remember the girl who sat on her bathroom floor, convinced she had nothing left. Remember the woman who walked into a courtroom and watched her abuser crumble under the weight of his own lies. Remember that survival is not weakness. It is the sharpest form of strength. They will tell you it's easier to stay quiet, that starting over is too hard, that no one will believe you. They will tell you your survival makes you broken. But listen to me. They are wrong. I was wrong too, once. I believed him when he said I wasn't built to stand alone. I believed survival meant shame. But now I know better. Because I survived, I fought back. And in the end, I didn't just save myself from him. I saved myself for me. So if you're listening, if you're in the dark place I once was, I want you to hear this. You are not disposable. You are not weak. Your survival is not something to hide. It's your proof, your weapon, your armor. She pauses, breath trembling but steady, eyes locked on the audience. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I learned to wear my survival. And it fits me better than he ever did.